Activision Legal Agreement Section 6.1 to the fullest extent permitted by applicable law, by submitting any user-generated content, including without limitation images, videos, and message postings, you grant Activision a perpetual, worldwide, royalty-free, irrevocable right and license to use, reproduce, modify, publish, and distribute such content or incorporate such content into any form, medium, or technology now known or developed throughout the known universe, and agree that Activision shall be entitled to unrestricted use of the content for any purpose without compensation, notice, or attribution. You waive and agree not to assert against Activision any rights you may have in any of your content. Section 13. Your rights under this agreement will terminate automatically without notice if you fail to comply with any term of this agreement. Upon termination of this license, you shall cease all use of the product and destroy all copies, full or partial, of the product. From here on, we are enemies. You and I. Ever since the Spider-Man 2 movie licensed game came out in 2004, Spider-Man has been one of the few series of licensed games to actually be successful over an extended period of time, even though all of the games since Spider-Man 2 have been wildly different degrees of quality, to say the least. Spider-Man 3 was an unrepentant piece of shit that had awful combat and mind-numbingly repetitive side missions that made it an absolute bore to play. Ultimate Spider-Man was a decent Venom game that they thought would sell better if they added some half-assed Spider-Man levels, and the first Amazing Spider-Man tie-in game, which I also reviewed, was basically Batman Arkham Asylum if Arkham Asylum sucked, aside from having plot holes the way Pimento Loaf has people that barf when they eat it. The last Spider-Man game I didn't bitch about was Spider-Man Web of Shadows, and I understand people who feel that game is repetitive, but for me, the story and atmosphere are so immersive and the combat so over-the-top awesome that I just can't help but enjoy it whenever I play it. Anyway, now there's another one of these damn games, which means it's time to put on the good old reviewing pants. So let's go. These pants have stool in them. So here's how the story goes. We find out we're going to track down Uncle Ben's killer, no doubt. Spider-Man interrogates a gang leader named Herman Schultz, who suspiciously is not the Shocker yet, and he tells you that Uncle Ben's killer is a gun smuggler and arms dealer. Yeah, forgive me if I call bullshit on this. The guy killed Uncle Ben after robbing a convenience store. I think if the guy was an arms dealer, he could have afforded a Diet Coke without having to rob the place. Come to think of it, turning out to be an arms dealer also happened to Joe Chill, the guy who killed Batman's parents in Batman the Brave and the Bold. Ripping off one incarnation of Batman wasn't enough, you had to go for two. The guy gets brutally murdered by the Carnage Killer, a mysterious serial killer who has been hunting down other murderers, and God does that sound familiar. And from there the story becomes really unfocused. The Carnage Killer causes all of the gangs in the city to freak out and the city's crime rate skyrockets. Kraven the Hunter and a Kingpin-funded task force step out to fight the gangs, and you don't trust either of them, so you investigate Kraven and the Kingpin. The first half of the game is basically nothing but setup. You know how people's main complaint with Duke Nukem Forever was that you didn't get to actually do much shooting because you were always doing pointless minigames or other side crap? Amazing Spider-Man 2 kind of does the same thing. In one of the early chapters, Kraven decides he's going to train you to become a hunter and help you fight the Russians at the same time. His first lesson? Follow the Russians around all day and eventually one will lead you to their base. No! Shit! Here's how the level goes. You swing to Kraven's place, you swing to where some Russians are, you hang on a wall until their supply truck arrives, and you swing to the Russian hideout. You have a brief stealth session, then you find out the Russians want to kill the Kingpin, so you swing to an event the Kingpin is hosting, you talk to Harry and wander backstage, you fight exactly 4 enemies, and then you wander back to the party so you can chat with Kingpin. That was one entire level, and do you know what you actually did in that level? You traveled a whole lot, had one stealth encounter, and fought exactly 4 enemies. The later levels have a bit more action, but a lot of the game's chapters are like this. You spend more time traveling and looking for people to extract exposition from than you spend actually fighting crime. That's the first problem of the game. It's just not very substantial. The levels are so short that it feels like you spend more time wandering around in the sandbox and chatting with people than you do actually doing structured missions. Much like the last game, the combat is based off Batman Arkham Asylum. You have one button to strike enemies and one button to counter when a prompt appears, and much like the last game, the combat still isn't nearly as good as it was in Arkham Asylum. The camera doesn't zoom out so you can see the entire group at once, you can't attack enemies that are about to attack you, and you take damage even if you hit them first, and probably the biggest problem of all, unless you're playing a challenge map, you will never find an enemy group with more than 5 people in it, so the fights are always too short and too easy, especially since levels tend to only have have 1 or 2 groups of melee enemies apiece. You also don't regenerate health automatically. You heal by holding down on the control pad, and the combat is so easy that the only way you'll die is if you keep forgetting to heal yourself. Your own stupidity is the only thing that's going to get you killed. That or concentrated suckiness. There are a handful of special enemies. There are girls that move super fast so you just web pull them a few times. There are guys with armor that you just web shoot a few times. Rarely you'll run into task force members on gliders that you web pull then beat them senseless. All enemies whose weaknesses are really easy to abuse. The special enemies are so mundane that the combat never evolves. There's no strategy needed. The only enemies that are pains in the ass are the giant enemies that you have to use a shockwave attack to stun, and you have to keep using the shockwave because they take so many hits to put down. They're not hard, they're just annoying. Why does Spider-Man have the power to fire shockwaves from his hands? Well, early on in the story, Spider-Man beats up the Shocker and steals his gauntlets. Gauntlets that belonged to Oscorp. Later on in the game, Spider-Man finds a stolen Oscorp suit and he steals that too. He basically says, I don't remember the actual line, "Wow, that high-tech suit is awesome! I'm sure my bestest bud in the whole wide world, Harry, won't mind if I take this armor and use it for myself. Not like he's going to miss it." Are we sure Spider-Man is the good guy in this game? Because his philosophy seems to be that stealing is okay if it's already been stolen. Shit, at this rate he'll probably knock over some task force members to add a glider to his Oscorp swag. But no Arkham Asylum wannabe is complete without stealth sections, and this is pretty much the one definite improvement from the first game. In the first Amazing Spider-Man movie game, the stealth was brain dead easy. You just crawled on the ceiling and you could take down instantly any enemy that you crawled over without fear of detection. In this game, you're limited to only being able to do takedowns if you're close to an enemy, forcing you to actually plan out moves and tactics. A refreshing innovation from Arkham Asylum is that the stealth environments are much larger and there's at least 12 enemies per environment, so the stealth actually kind of feels unique for this game and its copycats. I know, it's a frightening thought, isn't it? The stealth has its fair share of problems, though. Enemies either just walk in one straight line over and over, or they stand in one spot, staring in one direction. So planning tactics to take down enemies is like trying to outsmart a coconut. Enemies are also deaf. You can be beating up a melee enemy and your victim will be shouting, "Help me for the love of God!" And nearby stealth enemies generally still won't notice you. Unless you've bought the range upgrade, your detective vision, your spider sense, covers the level in so much distance fog that you can't see what the hell you're doing, making the stealth sections beyond maddening. If you use the web rush, your spider sense automatically turns off, and since the web rush is the primary way that you navigate rooms, you have to keep turning the detective vision back on. And navigating rooms is tedious because crawling on walls makes the camera turn to face the wall, so you have to keep manually moving the camera. But the big problem with the stealth sections is that stealth is pretty much optional. One of the upgrades you can buy from the start of the game lets you web pull guns out of enemies' hands and stick the guns to the ground so nobody can use them. A few quick button presses turns a group of stealth enemies into a group of melee enemies. It's also super easy to dodge gunfire, so getting spotted is pretty much a momentary inconvenience when it should be the primary thing that you're trying to avoid. The AI also goes screwy once an enemy with a gun has seen you. I've seen enemies teleport through solid objects and run in tiny circles, and I swear unless you web rush to the other side of the room, alerted enemies always know exactly where you are. But the sad thing is that the stealth sections are far and away the best parts of the game, because they feel like the only parts of the game where you actually get to do something. The combat groups are so small and the levels are so short that the stealth sections, where you track and hunt at least a dozen enemies at once, are the only substantial and stimulating parts of the game. Pretty much the only reason why Spider-Man games have been consistently successful is the web-swinging and exploration of a massive sandbox that the series has had since Spider-Man 2. In my opinion, the web-swinging in this game just isn't as fun as it was in the previous Spider-Man games, and it's all because of the web rush mode. Holding down a button lets you stop time, aim at a spot in the room, and then you instantly leap or web zip to the location you indicated. And this is the primary way that you navigate levels, since precise movements are otherwise impossible. The problem is that the game will try to force you to zip to a predetermined spot that you don't want, and you'll frequently run into dead zones where there's just nowhere to zip. Web rushing is by far the fastest way to get around the city, but A, it's not as fun as web swinging, and B, it really breaks the flow of the game when you literally have to keep stopping dead in your tracks to aim where you want to go next. I just think exploration was more fun in the previous games where you could super jump and web zip around the city instead of having to use the web rush to do both. Plus the camera tends to point towards the ground and zoom in a little too close to you, so you have to keep stopping to reposition the camera so that you can see where you're going. The big new innovation in this game is the hero/menace system. As you explore the city, petty crimes will pop up where you can do a brief mission to save civilians or stop bad guys. Completing missions fills a meter and increases your hero status, but missions go critical and then expire if you wait too long to do them, which drains the hero status and makes you a menace. The reason why you want to stay Paragon is that the Kingpin's task force will attack you if your status is Renegade. There are literally no other perks to maintaining a hero rating. There is a good variety of petty crimes, and some of them can be fun, but there are a ton of crimes at any given time, and they don't take long to expire, so if you don't do these missions constantly, your hero ranking drops like a stone. You don't get any audio or visual cue that a crime is about to expire. The Wii U version's touchscreen pulsates red if a crime is about to expire, but otherwise you don't get a warning of any kind. Once a mission goes critical, you have less than a minute before the mission expires, and most of the time you'll have multiple crimes go critical at once. I've had 4 petty crimes all go critical at the same time, and this has happened a lot more than once. One of the petty crimes that you can do is rescue a hostage that's being carjacked, which involves crawling over the car doing quick time events to take out goons and save the hostage. But get this, not only is the hostage always female, it's always the same female. She has a few palette swaps, but it's always the same character model, same face, same hair, same clothes. How many vehicles does this woman own that she can get carjacked 15 times a day? And you thought Mary Jane was danger prone. But the petty crime that I hate the most are the ones where you have to find and throw away a bomb, because you're given so little time to do these missions that if the bomb is hidden even slightly well, you won't find it in time, and your ass is getting exploded. And the petty crimes are mostly the only side quest in the game. There are a dozen races and combat challenges, but all of the other side quests are treasure hunts. Find 300 comic book pages, which to the game's credit you actually get to read the comics you find, which is cool. Track down and destroy Oscorp crates. Track down patient interview tapes that are so poorly laid out that you learn about plot points about 2 hours before they actually happened. And oh my god, the photographs! Jameson will send you emails asking you to take pictures in various levels and parts of the city, but the emails are so cryptic that you'll have no idea what you're supposed to do. Sometimes the emails will tell you what to look for, but you don't know where to find it, but most of the time the instructions are so vague that you'll have no idea what in the actual hell you're even supposed to look for. Find evidence on Project Venom. That could mean anything from take pictures of infected prisoners to go to the bathroom and take photos of their stool samples. And then the game gets snippy about what constitutes a good photo, so you have to keep moving until the game decides you've lined up a good shot. Did they go out of their way to make this as annoying as possible? But what I hate most about the collection side quests, you're probably going to wait until the end of the game to track most of this shit down, and you'll have to repeatedly stop looking for collectibles to do petty crimes. If you do enough petty crimes to get a 100% full hero meter, you have 10 minutes, if you're lucky, before the meter is empty again. So you have to constantly stop to do these stupid missions. I get it. I'm Spider-Man. I save people. Great power and all that shit. But give me a break! This is not good game design! So gameplay on the whole is mediocre, and the story is not much better. There's a really good animated movie called Superman vs. the Elite. It's all about questioning whether goody-good superheroes like Spider-Man are obsolete, whether our world has gotten so screwed up that we'd be better off if we just killed criminals outright to make things easier for everyone else. I honestly thought that was the direction this game's story was going, because Spider-Man is butting heads with Kraven, Carnage, the Task Force, brutal vigilantes that are supported by the public, while Spider-Man is thought of as a menace if he goes literally 10 minutes without pulling someone out of a burning building. But no, the game doesn't do anything remotely that creative or interesting. I'm going to tell you everything that happens in the story. Skip to this time code if you want to avoid spoilers, even though there's nothing worth spoiling in this game. Kraven, Carnage, Black Cat, one of the main gangs, and the Task Force are all working for the Kingpin. He started and then ended a gang war because he wants to control all of the crime. That's it. I just told you the entire story. Literally, this entire story boils down to the Kingpin is an asshole. Because every single character and plot point, using those terms generously, revolves entirely around him. There is no internal conflict or theme of any kind. And all of the boss fights suck ass. You fight Black Cat by using web pulls to stun her. You fight Electro by using web shots to stun him. You fight Green Goblin by web pulling his grenades to stun him. You fight Kingpin by using the shockwave to stun him. The only decent boss fight is Kraven because you start tripping balls and fighting hallucinations if he touches poisoned weapons. Incidentally, Kraven is the only interesting character in the game since he's a genuinely likable guy before and even after he turns out to be evil. After you fight Kraven, Spider-Man upgrades his webbing into ionic webbing. His webs weapons get charged with ions so that they can cause metal to immediately disintegrate and to deal damage against Electro, and this is science that would give Dr. Insano an aneurysm. The chapters where you fight Electro and Green Goblin might as well be titled "This is only in the game because these villains are in the movie." You see Electro in his human form once at the start of the game when Shocker is invading Oscorp, and then the guy is never seen, heard from, or mentioned again until you fight him towards the end of the game. You can find audio logs where characters talk about him, but he literally comes out of freaking nowhere at the end of the game. They didn't even try to incorporate Electro into the story. In the movie, Harry is dying from an incurable disease, and he gets more and more unhinged as everybody abandons him, and he grows increasingly more desperate. When he becomes the Green Goblin, it feels like the natural conclusion of his character arc. In the video game, he's just pissed that the Kingpin is trying to take his company, because the Kingpin is so fat he pulls all of the other plot points into his orbit, and then he just takes a serum and goes batshit. There's no build-up, he's only in the story because the developers were forced to put him in. And I understand that Green Goblin is supposed to be gibbering insane, but the things he does make no sense. He's pissed that the Kingpin is trying to steal his company. You'd think that nuking Fisk Tower would be at the top of Harry's to-do list when he becomes the Goblin, but no. First he places a few bombs in the street, not sure why, I guess he's going for the terrorist merit badge, and then he tries to bomb Oscorp, his own company! And what does Spider-Man say when Harry briefly becomes lucid and asks him for help? He says something to the effect of, "Buck up, sissy pants, live with your incurable disease like everybody else and spend the rest of your agonizing days making up for all the crap you just did." Spider-Man is an asshole! You track down the Carnage Killer about halfway through the game, and he's never seen again until the last level, where he turns into Carnage and takes over Ravencroft Asylum, and you have to go in and stop him. Yeah, the final level is you breaking into an asylum that's been overrun by inmates to stop a rampaging psychopath. Sound familiar to anyone? I know that Carnage is the final boss because he's the most powerful villain on hand, but the entire rest of the story is about fighting the Kingpin. Carnage should not be the final boss, and the sad thing is that Carnage is probably the easiest boss in the game. Well, maybe next to Shocker. You fight him by using shockwaves to stun him, and then he jumps onto a wall and you web pull him into a fire. That's it. My first fight with him was especially easy because the game glitched and Carnage sat still through the entire second half of the fight. Kind of a fitting way to end the game, isn't it? The only problem you'll run into fighting Carnage is the game's targeting system plotting to kill you. You can't pick or switch targets for your projectile attacks. In regular fights, this means your shockwaves and web shots will target only one enemy, and during the fight with Carnage, you can't web pull him off a perch because the game won't lock onto anything except for a valve that's on the other side of the room! The game's ending has Peter and Stan Lee discussing, I don't know.
He had an amazing life, right? So why do you want to make it all about how it ended? I want you to make his life mean something. I want you to be the man he raised you to be.
I miss Uncle Ben. I'll always miss him. But I don't have to replace him, because he already gave me everything I needed.
What in God's holy name are you babbling about? I think this exchange is a desperate attempt to make it look like the story has a theme because they're talking about how a person's life is more important than a person's death, but that has nothing to do with anything in the story! Nice try, but your story still sucks! Besides, isn't this the same half-assed lesson that was crammed into the end of Star Trek Generations? Just an observation. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 isn't a terrible game, but it's a hodgepodge of things that its predecessors have done much better. Spider-Man 2, 3, Ultimate, and Web of Shadows all had better web swinging, and the combat and stealth are still just pale imitations of the Arkham games. The petty crimes are the only new idea or innovation in the game, and all they do is annoy the piss out of you. And for God's sake, Beanox needs to get better writers, because this game's story is so disjointed and forgettable as... Shit, I had something for this. If you've played all of the other Spider-Man games and you just really want the newest one for something different, sure, go ahead. But in my most humble opinion, it's lousy!